Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Meenal Haran-Ketkar, and I am the Executive Director for Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome you all, and especially to those who I did not meet during our Interfaith breakfast in November. Let's begin by acknowledging whose land we are on today. Today, we hold space for reflection on and gratitude for the land upon which we live and the local waters that support and nourish us all. We recognize that this land and these waters were beloved by many who came before. We reflect together as people of faith in response to the calling of our hearts to come alongside the original stewards to this land and these waters that sustain us all. We seek to change the narrative of this story, our story, towards one of harmony with the gifts of creation and all living beings. We ask you to honor and learn from their intimate connection, love, and appreciation of these sacred lands and waters. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Joshua Long, and I use he, him pronouns. And on behalf of Interfaith Power and Light and our cohorts, Interfaith Partners of Chesapeake, and our grassroots partners, welcome to our 2025 legislative briefing for Maryland faith communities. We are so glad you could join us. As the congregational organizer with Interfaith Power and Light, I have the sincere honor of traveling all over the state to meet our faithful green leaders and congregations who are partnering on various ways to care for our shared common home. Many houses of worship in our network have transitioned to solar energy and other clean resources to power and heat our facilities. I know several of you who have been through the Faithful Green Leaders Green Team training with IPC. Through the Beyond Gas initiative, our communities have taken steps to highlight the harms of burning gas indoors, not just for the environment, but for the physical well-being of ourselves and our loved ones. And with Interfaith Partners of Chesapeake's One Water Partnership, congregations across the DMV are planting trees, managing stormwater runoff, all to help our ecosystems thrive. All over Maryland, from Hagerstown to Lexington Park, from West Baltimore to Salisbury, people of faith and spirit are finding ways to respond to the threat of climate change with love, justice, and equity at the center of it all. In this time of uncertainty with climate disasters and other worrying events, I'm truly grateful that me and my family can call Maryland our home. I am grateful for the work that we here have done to care for our communities, and I look forward to what we will continue to accomplish together. Over the next hour and a half, between opening and closing reflection, we'll celebrate the diversity of faith groups that are joining together today. We'll hear a call to action from Senator Clarence Lamb, a champion for clean energy and environmental justice in the Maryland legislature. We'll hear about 3 pieces of environmental legislation that our faith communities can support in the Maryland legislature this session. And finally, we'll have a chance to engage more deeply around one of those bills in a breakout room. We will be sharing a lot of details today, so please take a moment now and open the notes document that we've linked in the chat. You will find most of the details mentioned today, including speaker contact information and other links to fact sheets and resources, right there in the notes document. Just double-click on that link in the chat to pop it open. Now, my colleague Joelle will welcome our grassroots partners. Thank you.
And as I get ready to do that, I'm going to ask Rebecca to share that slide with all the logos on it, that first slide. So I'm Joelle Novi, she, her pronouns, and I work with Josh at Interfaith Power and Light, and we are in the Jewish month of Shavat, during which we celebrate a holiday called Tu B'Shvat, an ecological holiday. And now in its original context, Tu B'Shvat was a first blossom festival that came in early spring. But for the Jewish communities like mine that celebrate Tu B'Shvat here in Maryland, the holiday comes in mid-winter, long before first blossoms, and it directs our attention to what happens like underground and out of sight in the cold and dark that makes growth possible in the spring. The poet Marge Piercy writes that more than half the tree is spread out in the soil under your feet. When our faith communities show up and raise our voices during the Maryland legislative session, that is a visible blossoming and fruiting of the organizing that we've been doing out of sight underground all year long. Our faithful advocacy grows out of the slow, patient work of rooting into our spiritual traditions, aligning our lives more and more with our values, and building community to undertake the journey together. It's a scary time for so many of us, and a bleak one. We are looking out in midwinter at a landscape that feels barren, honestly, and devoid of life. But even today, right now, big, strong trees all across Maryland are alive. They are storing sugars in their roots. The sap is rising. So being together today, representing so many sacred traditions, holy communities rooted in a shared source of all life, I want to feel that aliveness too on this very cold February afternoon. We are gathered today through IPL, IPC, and 18 grassroots groups representing 5 faith traditions, multiple denominations, young people and elders who are our Maryland religious environmental movement. We are that half the living tree beneath our feet. Make sure I have the piece of paper with the full list. And so I want to mostly just say out loud the full list of groups that co-sponsor today's event that represent that year-round organizing that makes our work together possible. Beloved DMV Environmental Justice Collective, Baltimore Washington Conference United Methodist Church Creation Care, the Central Maryland Ecumenical Council, the Chesapeake Earthholder Community for Engaged Buddhists, Creation Care Ministry of the Delaware Maryland Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the Episcopal Diocese of Washington Creation Care Task Force, Green Dharma, the Hagerstown Area Religious Council, the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Washington, and the Jewish Community Relations Council of Howard County, the Jewish Climate Action Network DMV, which is also a Dayenu Circle, the Maryland Catholics for Our Common Home, the Maryland Just Power Alliance, which is a collaboration of AIM, PATH, and ACT, the Montgomery County Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions, lovingly known as McFax, the National Capital Presbytery Earth Care Network, the Sea Change Synagogues, Talbot Green Hands, and the Unitarian Universalist Legislative Ministry of Maryland. So from our many communities and traditions we gather, and I'm inviting Reba Caruth from the Baha'i Faith Community of Montgomery County to share an opening intention for our time together.
Thank you so much, Joelle. What a beautiful introduction. So I'm not going to take a lot of time, but I want to say that I'm very honored to be with each and every one of you. For those of you who don't know, the Baha'i faith is based on the principle of oneness, the oneness of God, the oneness of faith, the oneness of mankind. And it's with that tradition that we come to you today with the spirit of unity. The state of Maryland is located in the Mid-Atlantic region. The Chesapeake Bay watershed is basically comprised of not just Maryland, but other states. But we also share another waterway, which is the Atlantic Ocean. So we are also part of a system that is global. In the Baha'i faith, we have a saying and a tradition that the earth is but one country and mankind are its citizens. My intention today is to give you basically a framework of unity coming from e pluribus unum, from the many one, which is one of the founding principles of the United States of America, but also a foundation of beloved community, which starts with Josiah Rice, a philosopher at Harvard, and is later part of Dr. Martin Luther King's framework and vision of the beloved community, and is then picked up by Thich Nhat Hanh, the Zen Buddhist leader who creates the mindfulness movement. I will give you today a quotation, a meditation to start our meeting. It is from the Baha'i writings. It is a prayer from Baha'u'llah in English. His name means the glory of God. Blessed is the spot and the house and the place and the city and the heart and the mountain and the refuge and the cave and the valley and the land and the sea and the island and the meadow where mention of God hath been made and his praise glorified.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Reba, for that really wonderful reflection. So I'm Anna Wimbo. I'm the Director of Leadership Development here at IPC. And we're going to switch things a little bit. Senator Lamb, who's our keynote speaker, he's held up at a prior commitment, and so he's going to be joining us in about 15 minutes. But I wanted to just go ahead and talk about go do a deeper dive into the bill that he is sponsoring, the CHERISH Act. And so we'll just jump right in, and then we'll kick it back to Senator Lamb as soon as he joins us. So let me give you a minute, Rebecca, if you want to go ahead and share the slide deck, and then Jennifer, Jennifer Coons, who is our representative. She's a member at the South Baltimore Community Land Trust, is going to give us a little bit more detail about this bill. So take it away, Jennifer.
Yes, thank you so much. And I'm sorry not to be following Senator Lamb, who I'm sure would have kicked this off really well, but I looking forward to hearing from him later. And just a quick, I work for Clean Water Action, not the South Baltimore Land Trust, although we're very, very close partners, especially on this bill. And yeah, in addition, I'm member of Amazing Grace Lutheran Church in East Baltimore. So very happy to be with you all on this great afternoon. So yeah, here to talk about the CHERISH Act, which stands for From Cumulative Harms to Environmental Restoration for Improving Our Shared Health. And this is really key, important environmental justice legislation to address some huge gaps in the way Maryland handles permits to pollute from polluting facilities and industries to incorporate cumulative impacts analysis to that. And cumulative impacts means looking at the total effect of pollution from all different sources in a community on people in the community, on their health and their environment. And that's really important because, you know, when we're breathing the air in our neighborhoods, we're not just breathing one breath from, not that this would even be the same thing, but, you know, we're not just breathing one breath from the trash incinerator a mile away and another breath from the oil refinery 2 miles away. It's all mixing together in our bodies and all compounding with each other to cause negative health impacts. But that's not how Maryland law currently looks at how pollution impacts us when they're considering whether to allow another industry to pollute or allow continued pollution from an industry. The Maryland Department of the Environment and other permitting agencies just look at the pollution from a single industry in a silo and say, okay, is this too much pollution? Is this below the threshold that we think is okay? We're just going to look at the pollution from your one facility, not the total pollution on the entire community. And that means that we end up with communities facing environmental justice. Environmental racism and classism mean that polluting facilities are concentrated in the communities with the least institutional power to fight back. And that means that you end up with communities like South Baltimore that have, dozens up to 100 polluting facilities in the immediate community, harming people's health. So the CHERISH Act is a community-generated bill to address this very problem. Over the summer and the fall, South Baltimore Community Land Trust led a process of getting priorities from environmental justice communities across the state as to what can we do to improve Maryland's permitting system to fix this problem, and also looked at progress that's been made in other states in the last couple of years. So with that preamble, what does the CHERISH Act do? If I could actually skip to either before or after this, there should be where does it apply? There we go. So the first thing to know about the bill is how it is geographically targeted. So the CHERISH Act doesn't apply statewide. It applies in the 25% most polluted communities in Maryland. That's using a tool called Maryland EJ Screening Tool that is temporarily down just for these couple of days while MDE works to make it work without federal data, which they totally can. It just is going to take a minute. But based on that MDE state-maintained tool that we're still going to have access to, just not today, the CHERISH Act will apply to the 25% most polluted communities in Maryland, according to the EJ score on the Maryland EJ screening tool, and a small radius around them, because of course pollution doesn't stop at census tract lines. That's where it applies. Then to what it applies, if you could go backwards one slide. So what polluters would the CHERISH Act cover? This is also a really important part of the bill because there's some major gaps in how the processes that Maryland goes through to consider polluters. There isn't, as of yet, an environmental justice concerning list of permits in state law. And so this would create that. So the bill lists several different types of land, air, and water permits, and lists several different types of facilities that were based on, over the summer and the fall, what environmental justice communities said would be most important to cover. So when a company applies for a permit to pollute, one of these types of permits for these types of facilities in the specific census tracts that are addressed by the bill, it kicks off this process. If you could go back one more slide to what does it do? And so what the CHERISH Act does in those circumstances, when a company applies for one of those types of permits for one of those types of facilities in one of the geographic areas, the CHERISH Act kicks off a process that will let MDE evaluate what is the cumulative impact of pollution on the community, and will this permit make it worse? And if it will, the CHERISH Act says that MDE will deny the permit application in some circumstances, and in other circumstances require additional permit conditions and direct benefits to the community to mitigate that harm. So this is a really important bill to fix this really critical gap that holds MDE back from really addressing environmental justice considerations when it's considering permits to pollute. And especially in our current political climate, we even protections that once existed at the federal level as inadequate and halfway as they were, we cannot rely on anymore. And so we really want to send a strong call to our delegates and senators that we need to pass the CHERISH Act this year. This is urgent, and communities in Maryland on the front lines of pollution deserve these protections. So I will end it there and look forward to talking to many of you in the breakout rooms. And thank you so much again for having me today.
Thanks, Jennifer. And also thanks for underscoring the importance of what our voices as people of faith, really bring to bear on these important issues. I think it's really important that we all speak out, especially on such an important issue as environmental justice. I think we'll just move on to our next speaker, who is going to be talking about IPC's priority bill for this year, the Maryland Bottle Bill. And so I'll kick it over to Martha Ainsworth of Sierra Club, who is working with us really closely to help move this bill forward. So take it away, Martha, and I'll see if I can spotlight you.
Oh, thank you, Anna. Thanks very much. Good afternoon. I'm Martha Ainsworth. I'm the chair of the Maryland Sierra Club Zero Waste Team. I'm here to present on the Beverage Container Recycling Refund and Litter Reduction Program, also known as the Maryland Bottle Bill. The objective of this bill is to reduce littered beverage containers and plastic pollution. 5.5 billion. That's right, 5.5 billion beverage containers are sold in Maryland every year, but only about a quarter of them are getting collected for recycling. So that means we're leaving about 4 billion beverage containers a year in the environment, in landfills, at incinerators, or as litter. We see the results all around us in these photos. Are littered beverage containers on the roadside and in the waterways. They're by far the biggest component of litter by volume. And, that's not a surprise because a lot of beverages are consumed away from home, so they don't end up in your curbside bin. There are consequences. In the environment, littered plastic beverage containers break down into small plastic particles. They're ingested by wildlife and move up the food chain to people. And the littered, landfilled, and incinerated aluminum, glass, and plastic containers are really a waste of resources. They could have been used to make new containers and reduce the need for extraction of virgin materials and the associated greenhouse gas emissions. So the Maryland Bottle Bill will reduce litter and plastic pollution by capturing at least 90% of the beverage containers sold in Maryland every year, and will send them for recycling and reuse. So how does the program do that? If you could go to the next slide, please. A small refundable deposit is placed on the sale of glass, plastic, and metal beverage containers. And in this bill, it's 10 cents for containers less than or equal to 24 ounces and 15 cents for larger beverage containers up to 3 liters. The deposit's fully refunded when the containers are returned to a convenient retailer or redemption facility. For example, for recycling. For example, the reverse vending machine in the upper right-hand side, and a bag drop there on the lower right. And you think about this as buying the beverage but borrowing the container. We want the containers to come back. We don't want them in the environment. The program's implemented and financed by beverage producers through a nonprofit stewardship organization with strong oversight from the Maryland Department of Environment and an enforceable target of a 90% redemption rate 5 years into the program. The local governments have no responsibility for implementing or enforcing the program. They'll realize cost savings and a lot less litter. The program is actually budget neutral, which we all care about this year in particular. The deposit programs like this are the gold standard in the world for reducing beverage container litter. When you put a value to a used container, fewer people litter them or discard them into the trash. And when they are littered, other people collect them for the refund. The programs have been operating in 10 US states for decades. First was back in 1970 with Oregon, and they're spreading across the globe as a major intervention to prevent plastic pollution. This bill actually has learned a lot from the experience of the 10 states. It's a modernized modern bill. If this bill passed in 2025, the program would go into effect in January 2028, with allowing about 2.5 years for the startup to get everything going. So what benefits would we expect from this? Next slide, please. Well, first of all, the bill would divert about 3.6 billion fewer containers than are already being diverted from the environment annually, and 2.3 billion of those containers are plastic. As you can see in the bar chart on the right, the highest redemption rates are in states with a higher deposit level. So with a 10-cent deposit and convenient redemption opportunities, the programs get 90% or more of the containers back to be made into new containers. So it's a combination of the deposit and convenient redemption, and we have to keep that in mind. Because the redeemed beverage containers are kept separate from other recycling, bottle bills produce high-quality food-grade materials for closed-loop recycling or reuse. Local governments, like I said, would realize cost savings from less municipal solid waste as people stop trashing used containers and redeem them for the refund. The stewardship organization will collect, transport, and process the redeemed containers, and local governments will have less litter. New jobs will be created in recycling, and a grant fund will provide a source of investment in reuse systems. Program will annually avoid emissions from the equivalent of more than 50,000 cars. So what does the public think about these programs? Okay, this is new. This is just off the press. According to a just released opinion poll, 95% of registered voters in Maryland are concerned about the impact of littered plastic beverage containers and pollution. 91% would support a Maryland bottle bill with a 10-cent deposit financed by beverage producers, not taxpayers. That poll has hit the ball out of the park. Last slide, please. Just want to hit on some actions here that you can take. Here's the bottom line, and first, in terms of action, we have a major litter and plastic pollution problem, a highly effective solution that makes the beverage producers responsible for fixing it. The program's budget neutral and has overwhelming public support. So why are we waiting to pass this bill? I think you have to ask the legislators that. Now's the time to pass the Maryland bottle bill. Earn cash for trash and lose the litter. Every year we put this off, 4 billion more containers are going into the environment. And here are several ways you can help. Please notice that we just got the date of the hearing on the House. It's February 14th, Valentine's Day, 1:30 p.m. in the Environment and Transportation Committee. And we will be having a rally before that on Lawyers Mall from 11 a.m. to noon. If you scan the QR code, it'll go directly to an action alert that'll go to your state senator, delegates, and the governor. And I look forward to questions in the breakout rooms. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Martha. Yeah, we're really thrilled. You know, this has to be the year this bill passes. We'll talk more about this in the breakout rooms shortly. But now I'd like to kick it back to Antoinette to introduce our keynote speaker for today, Senator Clarence Lamb. So take it away, Antoinette.
Thank you, Anna, and hello, everybody. It's so nice to see you. Thank you so much for joining us on your Sunday. And we are honored to welcome Senator Clarence Lamb as our guest speaker for today's legislative briefing. Many of us have had the pleasure of hearing Senator Lamb speak at the Interfaith Breakfast in November, where he powerfully underscored the critical role faith communities play in advocating for meaningful environmental justice legislation, especially in light of the new administration. His insights were both inspiring and thought-provoking, reminding us of the impact that collective action can have on shaping policy. Senator Lamb, we invite you to share how your story and your values connect to this work. And it would also be very valuable to us if you shared your insight into the new developments of the Office of Management and Budget's recent actions on the partial block. We would really appreciate your perspective on what to expect moving forward in this involved evolving legislative landscape. And thank you so much for joining us. Without further ado, Senator Lamb.
Sure. Thank you so much, Antoinette, and a pleasure and an honor to be here. I want to thank the Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake and also the Interfaith Power Light and all the other grassroots organizations who help convene this and organize all of you this afternoon. A good opportunity to be able to share some perspective from Annapolis, as well as just kind of the national kind of environment as we see things going on in just the last 14 days. And so a lot going on, obviously. But let me start with a little bit of background about myself. I'm Senator Clarence Lamb, represent parts of Howard and Anne Arundel counties in the Maryland General Assembly. I'm in my 10th year, served one term in the House, and previously another full term in the Senate, my second term currently in the Senate. So I am also the only physician in the state Senate. And so my background as a preventive medicine physician and also practice occupational medicine as well. I see patients every single week, and I run the preventive medicine program at Hopkins. Preventive medicine is really especially public health. And that's why it really kind of overlaps with the things that you prioritize and are discussing today, because we know so much of health is impacted by things that are outside of the hospital and the clinic. All of these other social determinants of health, including environmental health, is incredibly important in determining, people's health outcomes. And so for many years, while I was in the House, I served on the state's Commission on Sustainable Communities, Environmental Justice, and really have dived into these issues as it pertains to environmental justice, environmental health, public health, and what we in the legislature can do to help improve the health of our communities from Annapolis. I always point back to this example, particularly my work in environmental justice on that commission. When you look in places like Baltimore City, and many of you are probably familiar with this, that you look at even just how impactful someone's zip code is in how they grow up, the opportunities they have, and their health outcomes. It's no surprising that we see areas like Roland Park in Baltimore City, which is just a few miles away from Sandtown, in another neighborhood in Baltimore City, where there's a 20-year difference in life expectancy just a few miles apart. Between 85 years of age for average life expectancy in Roland Park and 65 in Sandtown. None of that is a coincidence. And in large part, that's due to all these other social terms of health, of people's opportunities, whether it's education, transportation, jobs, and the economy, and also the environment. And that's why the work that you're all doing is so important, to be able to press forward on policies that we can continue to work on at the state level, in spite of all the challenges and issues that we see at the federal level and continue to see as well. Let me touch on a bill that I'm working on in Annapolis, because I think it's of interest to this audience, and then kind of wrap up with just the national perspective of where we see things are and where they're going. I am working on a bill dealing with environmental permitting. And this is an issue that I've worked on for many, many years. It's called cumulative impacts when it comes to environmental permitting. And let me give a little bit of background on this. When there are facilities that want to engage in activities that might cause emissions or pollution or impact a local community, they have to seek a permit from the Maryland Department of the Environment. And the Department of the Environment might review that permit application and say, well, this as a permit is below the permissible limit and under the threshold by which there's any concern. And so we allow this facility to engage in this action that might create some emissions and whatnot. And what the Department of the Environment does is view each of these permits in isolation. But we also know that when you start stacking these permits in and around neighborhoods, oftentimes that are impoverished or in need, it's having an outsized impact on that neighborhood or on that community that may extend beyond just that single permit application. But MDE, the Maryland Department of Environment, doesn't take that full cumulative impact of all of those environmental permit applications into account when they're reviewing these permits. And so That is a significant concern because we know that there are a lot of environmental justice communities across the state. That is no coincidence that a lot of the most polluting industries and manufacturing sites and facilities are oftentimes located around some of the most impoverished or challenged communities. That is not an accident. And I think all of you on this Zoom and in this audience recognize that. So the bill that I have is called the CHERISH Act, Cumulative Harms to Environmental Restoration for Improving Shared Health. Not a title that I came up with. My staff has been incredibly resourceful in coming up with that. So the CHERISH Act really tries to address the problem that we described. And so the current law in Maryland requires the calculation of an environmental justice score. So every application that comes forward for a permit gets the EJ score, environmental justice score, but nothing is done with that score besides just kind of reporting it. And what happens is that certain communities have a high concentration of polluting businesses with no real way to prevent it. So it doesn't make sense that we're scoring these permits based on their environmental justice impact, but not using that score. So what the CHERISH Act does is that it says when a permit application is for a project that's near a community with a high environmental justice impact score, the State Department of the Environment will have to consider the environmental and pollution burdens of that on a community. And so this means that that environmental justice score will actually mean something and be accounted for when they decide on whether or not that permit application should move forward or not. And it finds that if there's a potential adverse impact in the community's environment and public health, then the Department of the Environment can choose not to approve the application. Unless the permit is required to protect public health, there's an exception in there, or the applicant agrees to provide a reserve fund to help serve and provide for community mitigation programs that will extend for the entire life of the project in that community. So this is really to put some teeth on that environmental justice score that the Maryland Department of the Environment has been working on over many, many years, and finally be able to use it to weigh in on whether these potential permit applications should move forward or not. So, you know, that bill hearing will be coming up soon. Could certainly use the support of individuals like yourself and others in the community to move forward on this really important bill at the state level. And let me just wrap up with this, that I know, you know, it's only been day 13 of the transition in the federal administration. Certainly been very disheartening, certainly been very concerning. A lot of what we hear is really, really alarming. You know, and what I mentioned a couple months ago was that, you know, the arc of justice and history is never always forward, that it's a struggle. Everything's a struggle that we do, that we don't have successes if we don't press forward. And oftentimes there's a tension between moving forward and forces that are pulling us back. Certainly, we're in a period where this is 2 steps back after a couple steps forward. This may be 10 steps back after a couple steps forward. But we won't continue to make progress unless we continue to push forward and have to put our heads down, do the hard work, especially for the next couple years. That work may be at the state and local levels because we're seeing a lot of things at the federal level being dismantled or moving in the wrong direction. But know that what we're doing at the state level will help lay the groundwork for eventual forward progress that we will see sometime in the future when this administration moves on. And so that's why the work that we do at the state level is so important, not only to protect Maryland from all the negative impacts that we continue to see coming out of this White House and administration, but because what we do here and what we do now will serve as an important roadmap for what the national government can do in the future. We just need to have success at the state and local level to do that. And that's why your work is so incredibly important, to be able to organize this afternoon and continue to press ahead with things that are really important for our state here in Maryland. So let me just wrap up there, see if there are any questions. Happy to take any questions or hand along back to Antoinette or others.
Does anybody have any questions for Senator Lamb?
Go ahead, Cindy. You can unmute yourself.
Hi, good afternoon, Senator. I was wondering if you could please explain the enforcement mechanisms to the group. I know that MDE has a bill in place regarding setting new fees to get more staffing in place, that there's been staffing shortages. I'm generally just wondering how the enforcement piece would work for the CHERISH Act as well.
That's a good question. The enforcement piece really is a requirement on MDE to account for the EJ score. And we're having this serve as a starting point because previously the EJ score had not even ever been accounted for in their decision making. It was basically something that was done, but then just kind of FYI or for information only. I think the starting point here that we've been able to get folks comfortable with is to at least have them account for it and see how they do in accounting for it. I think there's a willingness within this administration and the leadership at the Maryland Department of the Environment to take the EJ score into account. If we find, and we'll obviously be monitoring closely if we pass this bill into state law, if we find that they're not really accounting for it or they're not using it in a way that's actually meaningful in deciding whether to grant a permit or not, then we can decide how to, be able to put some more teeth into it to potentially have folks maybe sue the Maryland Department of the Environment or to require them to, I guess, expand on the EJ score as part of the review so that it becomes an even higher factor in their decision-making process. Right now, it's not part of their decision-making process at all. We're just trying to crack the door open by saying it has to be considered. If we find that it's not being considered to an adequate degree, we can certainly increase that consideration even more and then put some further enforcement into it. That's a good question. Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you.
So we'll take one more question from Alice. You can unmute yourself, and then, we're going to have much more of an opportunity to take a deeper dive during the breakout in a few minutes. So, I'm not sure whether Senator Lamb, you'll be able to join us for the breakout, but that would be great. You're welcome to join us once we break out. Go ahead, Alice.
Thank you. I am very interested by this bill and applaud you. This is, it's great to see this. And my question comes a little bit from the data center perspective and the concern about welcoming this industry, but knowing it's going to have this huge environmental impact, and especially with diesel backup generators at data centers. And it just strikes me that this first part of your bill, where you limit it to the 25% most polluted areas, I'm like, that doesn't include data center areas. So if you tweaked it there, the bill would protect a lot more people. That's my question would be, are you open to such an amendment?
Yeah,
Or
certainly open
would you see the
to,
logic in that and how it could even get you more support for it because
right.
it gets too different. Anyway, I'll mute myself now. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point. We could certainly open up to more locations and other areas that would be covered under this, and definitely open to having a conversation about that. The data centers piece is important because we're seeing obviously more and more data centers being looked at and proposed here in the state, and the impact will continue to grow. I think what we're trying to balance here is that we want the Maryland Department of the Environment to come along and to be a willing partner in this, because this becomes a lot easier if they're willing to account for this and work with us, hopefully to support this legislation and definitely to not oppose this legislation. If we are too broad in where we go with this, they may very well come in and oppose the bill. That will make it very difficult to pass. Cumulative impacts as a topic has been very difficult to pass. It's one that I've been working on for the last 10 years as a legislator. I think one of my first bills was dealing with cumulative impacts as well back in 2014. And even since then, it's been really difficult to gain traction on this. And so while I think we all understand the value of having cumulative impacts addressed throughout the state, I think we're also dealing with the reality where if we have opposition from the Department of the Environment, it can be very difficult to pass. And so this is a starting point for that conversation discussion. And hopefully once we're able to have success here, we can expand it further as well.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we're doing good on time. So I'm just gonna read out this additional question that Joelle had. And the question really is about, this audience is all members from the faith community. And so how would you recommend we can, go about making our voices heard in Annapolis? And, if you can say something about the value of congregations getting involved in, any distinction or distinctive gifts that we bring to advocacy.
Yeah, I mean, I think the two things. One, I think congregations and faith-based communities are really, really important in a day and age where the ability for us to bring people together is becoming more and more challenged all the time. That institutions that used to get people together into the same room to organize, to come to consensus on things, those norms and those institutions are oftentimes gone or in the rearview mirror because of social media and digital and just, kind of a different time that we're in. Your congregations are incredibly important in still bringing people together, to get people on the same page, to get them organized, to be able to testify and support and get support behind a particular piece of legislation. That's really, really important because what we see in Annapolis when people come down does resonate and make an impact amongst our colleagues. And so your ability to bring people down to testify on a bill like the CHERISH Act with a cross-section, throughout the state of Maryland is really impactful and I think will resonate. That's number one. Number two, just briefly, is that with this new administration coming in at the federal level, I think the faith-based community still has an outsized voice. And what you say and what congregations say and what faith-based leaders say do resonate with some of the folks that are in this new federal administration. And so that's why they were so reactive, for example, with the immigration crackdown, when many faith-based leaders said that's not aligned with our values. There's an immediate response to that. And so the voices that our faith-based community and our faith-based leaders and their congregations have certainly resonate and generate a response out of this administration. And that means that what you do to organize at state, local, and federal level, and working with others as well, other congregations of similar denominations or perspectives or views, not only in Maryland, but across the country, can really, really have a strong impact.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think we're going to need to move on. Thank you again, Senator Lamb, for all your insight and for sharing all this really useful information, and also just your encouragement to help us, light the fire under us to keep pushing forward in all this work. It's been quite dizzying, the last several days. And so we'll just keep marching on. So thank you again.
Thank you. It's important work. Keep working at it.
Thank you, Senator Lamb.
Yeah, thank you so much. And so now we're going to shift over to Andrea Orozco from IPL. She's been, really working hard on the Better Buildings Act. And so take it away, Andrea.
Yeah, good afternoon. It's very lovely to be with you all today again. I know that last year when I joined, it was my first one and everybody was new. And now looking around the circle, around like the squares and the names in the chat, like it is really heartening to like see so many people that I recognize. But yeah, so I'll be talking about the Better Buildings Act of 2025. We do have bill numbers, which I did not include here, but I will make sure to include in our research document, which is just a callback to if you would like to open that, or if you already have it open, that will be a living document. But it is sponsored in the House by Delegate Boafo and in the Senate by Senator Brooks, which were our sponsors last year, and we're really excited to have them again. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you so much. So what's in the bill? What is the Better Buildings Act? This law would require all newly constructed buildings in the state of Maryland to meet their space and water heating needs without the use of fossil fuels. And so specifically thinking there about gas water heaters and gas space heaters. And so that helps us do a couple of things, right? The first one, it helps us reduce our energy costs. We know that the prices of gas are not as fixed, and we're seeing rate hikes every year, and it's just like an uncontrolled market. We know that switching over to a fully electric building or living in a fully electric building will help stabilize those costs, and in the long term, as our grid and our energy supply gets greener and cleaner, those costs will lower. And then the second thing that I feel like both Cherish and our keynote speaker have touched on is about the impacts of our health, right? Public health for our neighbors. I'll talk about this a little bit later in another slide, but we know through our testing of gas kitchen stoves at IPL with our partners at AIM Path Act and also the Sierra Club that we think those numbers inside of gas burning buildings are just too high. We know that the impacts are too high. So those are the main two things that this bill does. The other thing is that there is no reason that we should be building any new gas burning buildings in Maryland. We've made legislative and executive commitments through both bills and also executive orders to reach net zero emissions. We know that building a gas burning building will just lead to costly retrofits down the line. If we build better buildings, we know that we will avoid some of those costs, and we can take care of our neighbors, and we can meet our goals, and we can do all of the things. So it really is a total no-brainer that we should be working on this, right? Can we go to the next slide, please? So why now? So the Better Buildings Act was originally a provision inside of the Climate Solutions Now Act, which it would not surprise me if many of the people on this call supported back in 2022. And so it's really about seeing our commitment through, right? Second, we know that our buildings make up roughly 16% of our current emissions in the state, and that might be a little high. That number is from a couple of years ago, directly from MDE. So in order to meet our goals, the goals that we've committed to as a state, as a community, we need to make that change now. We're not going to get to 2035 or 2045 if we're not addressing our buildings. And finally, we really deserve to live, worship, and go to school in clean and safe buildings. Before I get to the testing, I also wanted to point out that in Montgomery County, one of the largest counties in the state, this has been adopted at the local level. We know that Howard County is also working on a similar bill, on a similar local bill. Baltimore County is also introducing Baltimore City, is also introducing something similar. And so if the people in all of these counties and these cities are calling for this, then it really feels like the state should follow their lead. And I know that we talked about in the context of the federal level and the state level, where we know that state work can advance our mission, really looking at our local work advancing our state work as well. And so, yeah, and so like I mentioned earlier, alongside our partners at the Maryland Just Power Alliance and the Sierra Club, we know that through kitchen testing that gas burning appliances emit unsafe levels of nitrogen dioxide. The EPA has guidance about outside emissions, which is about 100 parts per billion is normal and safe. And there have been homes where some of these kitchens are measuring at 600, 700 parts per billion, which is just unsafe in the long term and the short term for our most vulnerable neighbors, our kids and our older adults. So yes, can we go to the next slide, please? And so finally, I really wanted to highlight this photo. I think our cardboard buildings are quite neat, but this is really the time to take action. I know that the legislative session can be fast paced and a little bit wonky sometimes to get adjusted to, but now is really the time to speak out. And so we'll have a little bit more about concrete asks at the end of the call as well, but I just wanted to shout out that IPL will be in Annapolis the evening of February 17th. And Better Buildings is one of the bills that we will be advocating for and lobbying for. And as bill hearings get assigned, you can also come back to the resource document and I'll make sure to populate it with any action alerts, any direct asks that we might make of you to contact your legislators. And my email is also in that resource document. If you ever have a question or if you would like for us to chat a little bit more about it individually or for your congregation, please feel free to send me a message. And I'm always happy to find some time. But yes, I will leave it there and I hope to see many of you in the breakout group.
Thanks so much, Andrea, for all your work on this. I know it's been, lots of really late nights and hectic days. So thank you. Thanks, Andrea. Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks, Martha, for everything that you're doing and helping move all of these initiatives forward. So now we're going to I just wanted to flag for everyone that there is this resource document that has links to all of the fact sheets and additional important tools to just kind of keep you abreast of how these bills are moving throughout the session. So take a look at that. And I'm wondering if somebody can just reshare it now so that everybody has it before we go into the breakout rooms.
Welcoming everyone back. I again am Joelle Novi with Interfaith Power and Light. I hope everyone here is feeling more ready now than you did when we began to raise your voice in support of these three bills and others. The other thing that I wanted to share in another thing that's linked in that resource document that I just put in the chat again, put it again so it's the last thing, is there's always one person in every congregation who says, wait a minute, we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Are you sure we're allowed to advocate in Annapolis for strong environmental justice policies? The answer is yes. Spoiler alert, yes. It is totally kosher for our congregations to participate in this kind of work, but we have linked some resources from Boulder Advocacy and from IPC in that resource document to allay any concerns about exactly what is appropriate for nonprofits like our congregations to do in terms of advocacy. So it's been so good today to be with people from so many different communities across Maryland. I want each person to remember that you are the most powerful person in the world to raise these issues in your own congregation, and to think about how you will use that power in the coming weeks and days. I hope that something you heard today, one of the bills or something about one of the bills, gave you an idea of something you want to do specifically to rally your community or your congregation in the coming weeks. And I wanted everybody to think for a minute, because it's been a lot of information, about your favorite idea of what you might do coming out of this session. And I want you to think about what the first step is. So maybe it's emailing one of the speakers that you heard today to invite them to speak at your congregation, or something think about what the first step would be to implement the idea you had about the thing you can do that you want to do with your community. And just because it helps to hold each other accountable to say these things out loud, I want to invite you to put that next step in the chat so we can all witness your plan and hold you to it. And I invite everyone to enter those in the chat. Yes, and the document that Anna just linked is also in the resource document. Great. Great. People are going to do a letter of support. They're going to do the Baltimore Washington Conference Advocacy Day and bring some people, share the bills. Yay. Awesome, awesome, awesome. contacting legislators. The other thing to know is state legislative work is so satisfying, partly because Maryland is awesome and we have strong policy here and strong leaders, but also because it doesn't take that many people calling their state legislators to make an impression, like 6 calls. You know, it's not the same as Congress. So, so just know that an organized effort to contact your legislators or meet with them is very, very impactful. People are connecting things with folks in Frederick. The green team is going to get updated, discussing with the pastor, attending a lobby night. Beautiful. So I want to thank everyone for joining us. We're going to do our closing things today, right now, and continue to put your commitments in the chat. I love it. So we're going to thank Senator Lamb for joining us. We're going to thank everyone with Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake, Interfaith Power and Light, and the friends and neighbors calling in from across Maryland and over 18 faith groups that are supporting us today. We are going to invite Anjali Gulati, IPL DMV's Green Dharma organizer, to close us out. And then you are invited to sing along on mute, sing along on mute to the Tu B'Shvat melody we opened with as we prepare to raise our voices in this year's Maryland legislative session together.
Thanks, Joelle. Thanks, everybody. Hi, I feel so blessed to be in solidarity with you all today for our common mission of moving Maryland closer to what environmental justice really means. Across all of our faith traditions, we're called to view the natural world as sacred and to work for the well-being of all beings. All of the natural world is divine. Across Hindu traditions and communities, we're told that all aspects of creation and all living beings are inherently divine. Mountains, rivers, trees, animals, and our fellow human beings. The Bhagavad Gita calls us to rejoice in the flourishing of all beings. Green Dharma means bringing that vision to fruition by leaning into our Dharma, which means duty, to advocate for environmental and climate justice. Only changes in laws and policies and financed by extractive and exploitative industries can achieve climate justice. Only when these changes are created by social movements will the root causes of climate change be solved at the necessary scale and depth. Dharma does not allow for comfortable silence. Rather, as Sant Tukaram declares, when you have business with the powerful, you must speak firmly with them. So we have that opportunity this General Assembly session in Maryland. And talking to lawmakers is not always easy, but it's most necessary. By fighting for the protection of the earth, we're fulfilling our dharma towards Bhudevi Prithvima, other words for Mother Earth, which means something different to everyone, but is the same for all of us. And by speaking up against exploitation and against the destructive fossil fuel industry, we're fulfilling our dharma towards future generations. So thank you all so much for joining Maryland's movement for climate justice this year, at home and in Annapolis. Now we can enjoy the Tu B'Shvat song.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your afternoon. Bye.